Hello.
Good morning. We'll give it another minute or two, and then you and I will shoot the shit.
Yeah, I've got the computer here. I've got Google search. I can answer the questions, maybe.
Google search about your personal experiences, huh?
Try to sound intelligent, come up with some big words. I don't know. Now we've got, okay, I show a 30 minutes meeting after this with somebody else, and then we've got Neil's at 11 is what I show. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
So somebody squeezed in between our two meetings?
Yeah.
How do you let that happen?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, in that case, we better get started.
Let's do it.
Okay. So good morning. This is Sherif with American CEO, where we strive to help CEOs learn the job better, increase their valuation, increase their confidence, and increase their work-life balance by delivering predictable performance. And Joel is joining us from Austin. How are you today, Joel?
Doing great, Sherif. Good to be with you.
And good to be with you as well. So today we have a little bit of a different webinar. All the past webinars have been about business and performance and tools and strategies and tactics. Today's topic is business and spirituality. And so I have to give a couple of disclaimers. Things like God and spirit and source and energy mean different things to different people. So we're not here to get into the weeds of that. There are all kinds of expectations possible from somebody tuning into a talk like this. And I actually sent emails to all the people that I had known had registered to get some of their questions. And so nothing we're talking about here has anything to do with freedom of religion or legal concerns in the business. This is all about personal experience. And so I have some notes, and we'll see where the flow takes us, Joel.
Sounds good.
So I know you like John Maxwell. I remember back, I think after 2008, when the crisis happened, somebody asked him, will you give us a talk about business ethics? And Maxwell's response was, there's no such thing as business ethics. There's such a thing as ethics, and either you have it or you don't. Right. And so it feels like it ties a little bit into what we're talking about. When people think about business, when I grew up in the 80s, there's a movie called Wall Street, and greed is good. More recently, The Wolf of Wall Street, or Greed is Better. There's a TV show called Billions where, in the last season, Axelrod did a talk about greed being good again. And so maybe since that's in the popular culture, we can start there about your personal views on business and greed and spirituality.
Yeah. Well, so, greed, at least in the Christian, Judeo-Christian tradition, has existed as one of the sins for eternity, right? Even before we talked about corporations or any large organizations of people from a business perspective, greed was obviously perceived as something that was a very strong emotion that could have significant negative consequences. So, I think people create a lot of artificial boxes. They create, this is business and this is personal and this is nonprofit and this is for profit. And those are very artificial, in my experience, boxes. There's really, if you're dealing with people in whatever setting, there's a lot of commonality. And while your objectives might be slightly different, if you're running a church versus running a for-profit business, you're still acting through people. And so all the human characteristics that the great religions have talked about for many millennium are still very much front and center, and you have to deal with the human condition. And there's no way to separate it out. It would be nice if you could go into this business world where none of these failures, human failures, existed, but that's not the case. But when people create movies like Wall Street or whatever, and they very much stereotype greed, like greed's only involved in business. That never happens anywhere else in the world. That's just not true. Many of us fight with greed in our personal lives, fight with greed in nonprofit jobs or organizations. I mean, greed is just a human failure that we have to deal with across the whole spectrum of activities that we engage in.
That's a beautiful answer. And so I know that you have zero preparation for this talk, and that this is not the normal talk that you've done a lot of times, so where you have a lot of answers ready. So if I ask you something and the answer is pass, please feel free to say pass. In your career, you've been head of 8 companies, and you're involved with a lot of business projects all over the place. Is there an instance that you remember where greed came about and where your sense of spirituality, how you dealt with it?
Yeah. So, one of the things, I've done a lot of transactions, done 8 or 9, large transactions, been on both sides, been a buyer, been a seller. And it's amazing the closer you get to the end of a transaction, how much greed shows up. Almost everybody, when a transaction happens, you find in your organization believes they deserve just a little bit more than whatever it is they're actually going to get from the transaction. And in my experience, it doesn't matter whether they're getting a lot from the transaction or very little from the transaction. They think they deserve a little bit more. They deserve a little bit special treatment. And the same thing on the buying side. Often when you get down to brass tacks, people try to grab a little bit more than what was the original deal. They try to retrade the deal. They try to renegotiate. They try to, hold on to things. And that's all, in my opinion, related to greed that comes up. And so you got to be aware that happens. As if you're the leader of one side or the other, obviously you're trying to do a transaction that's as fair as possible. But nobody's going to be happy with it. And so if you're not centered very well and confident that you are acting from the right place, that your heart's in the right place, that you're trying to put together a fair transaction, it can be very, very difficult because everybody's going to think, again, almost everybody, it's amazing. People come out of the woodwork, saying, boy, I really helped you here, that I really deserve more than whatever the, contractual obligation is. And so, it's a really challenging time for a leader to go through those transactions when you feel like everybody should be happy, everybody should be excited, but often there's a little bit of sense of disappointment from people in the organization.
Okay, so number one, how do you know that you are centered and coming from a fair place? Because that's different for different people, right? And then number two, when somebody does want to have more than what the original deal was, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so, and this is true of all decision making, you want to make all the decisions when you're not emotionally engaged and stressed. And so, you learn, especially after you do 1 or 2 of these large transactions, that you want to make sure you dot all your I's, cross all your T's way before any transaction happens. So it's very clear to everybody exactly what they have, what they get. There's no subjective, there's no wiggle room. The documents are done. People have signed the documents. Those kind of things become really important, because if you wait until you're near a transaction, and I see this all the time where you'll have a transaction and a CEO will tell them, well, I really feel like I promised that guy something, additional. Well, how much did you promise him? Well, we never really determined exactly. Well, okay, you've just set up a catastrophe, and it's very hard for you to be objective when all the stress of the deal is in place. And so you want to, the only way I have found to have a chance to be as clear-headed as possible is to make all those decisions well in advance, make sure they're documented, make sure they're clear, they're down on paper, so that when the time comes and everybody's under stress. And, if you haven't done it, one of the most stressful things you can ever do in your life is sell your business. And so that's the last time you want to be trying to make difficult decisions about what's fair. It will be very hard to do that.
Well, I know you're writing a book called, The Last 100 Days. So this sounds like a topic that is going to be highlighted in your book that's coming up. Going back into actually running your company, you're not in an exit situation. All the great philosophies, all the great religions have a commonality, which is you lead with love, you lead with the golden rule. It's about forgiveness, all of these things. So the nature of spirituality, I would say, is unboundedness and love. The nature of business is judgment and measurement, right? So
I would say some people think the nature of business is judgment and measurement. I don't think that is the fundamental nature of business. And there are stages of a business too, a little bit, that I think people get hung up. Yeah, when you're doing a brand new startup and you're trying to build some product that's never been built and take that to a market, that's very much about the tactical things of building a product, and there's a lot of judgment, measurement, and stuff that can be applied there. But once you get a business going and you've reached some sort of kind of critical mass, and you're talking about scaling that business or continuing to grow that business or sustaining that business for a long period of time, then that business is all about people. The only way you grow a business sustainably is to master the ability to attract and make productive, talented people. You really, as a leader, when you're a startup, your business, you're in whatever business you're in. Let's say you're building a better mousetrap. Okay, you're in the mousetrap building business for the first 0 to 10 or 20 employees. You're trying to figure out how to build a better one. You're trying to figure out who you sell it to. You're trying to market it, so on and so forth. But once you get past that initial stage, and we're in the mousetrap making business, and we're one of the brands that people go to for mousetraps, as the leader, then you become in the people business. You totally switch, and your job's to make sure the organization has the right people in it, they're in the right seats, and that is all about the same things that spirituality would talk about. Love. Do you really care for your people? Are you trying to act in their best interests? Is everybody bought into the mission of the organization? And so I think, the CEO job is highly people oriented, highly personal, and moves very much away from the measurement and judgmental aspects that maybe people perceive it to be, who have not done the job or been out, outside, not in the business world.
Some people are programmed, Joel, that making money somehow is a bad thing. What do you have to say to that?
Well, first of all, there's a vocabulary problem with that. Sometimes we develop these words and we use them over and over again without really thinking the implications of the words. So I don't like making money. It doesn't make sense to me, right? I mean, if you take it literally, making money, nobody makes money other than the U.S. government. And that's pretty bad when they make money. Generally, that's not a good thing. But that aside, without getting into macroeconomics, I think people use the term making money, and I think that causes poor thinking, and it's a poor paradigm. What is really happening in business is somebody is trading one thing of value for somebody else that has another thing of value. And in any voluntary transaction, both people believe they are getting the better end of the deal. That's what's so beautiful about business. It's why business revolutionized the human condition, was the ability to trade, to exchange my beaver furs that I was very good at going out and hunting for wood to burn in my fireplace, or whatever that somebody else was very good at chopping down, right? And so people get so focused on this, making money concept that's really not what is going on at all. What is going on is two groups have things of value that they willingly exchange. Now, some people value the money more, than they value the wood or the beaver furs or whatever it is they sell into the market, and they want to collect as much of that as possible. But that's fine, because as long as it's a voluntary transaction, again, the other side is willingly exchanging that money. And so I think, when you understand that's what business fundamentally is open trade, if it is transacted ethically. Obviously, if people lie about, create fraud about what they're selling or whatever, but we're talking about ethical business transactions, those both parties are benefiting. So I've always had trouble that people thought that somehow was bad. But I think it's because they use that term making money, and they don't really think about what's really happening. They're not making money, they're exchanging things of value.
That's very discerning, and that makes a lot of sense. So if somebody were to ask you, does spirituality help you in business, based on previous answer where business is about people, what would your response be?
Sure. I can remember my father always said that, if you don't believe in something greater than yourself, I don't know how it works. And this was a man who was not a religious man, would not be described as a religious man, did not attend church services, but had fought in World War II and had, been in the proverbial foxhole. And I guess what they say, everybody believes, every soldier when they're in the foxhole believes, was kind of the thing. And so, yes, certainly for me personally, it makes the leadership role much easier. I don't know if you depended totally upon yourself, that would seem to be a hard way to do the job, and maybe not orient you in the right direction. I can't say, because that's not my particular view of the world. So, but I certainly think it is very helpful. The major religions are certainly all about improving our personal foibles, which show up very much in the CEO role. One of the things I always tell CEOs is, when you're even the VP of sales, the VP of marketing, you can kind of be a weird dude, and as long as you can do your job, people don't really care much. When you move into that CEO role, it's a very personal job, and people care about what your personal views are and how you express those views and how you and the values you hold. And we've seen, the various CEOs. I mean, just one a week or two ago, firing 900 people on Zoom, which turned out to get him fired within about a week. But just showing, total unconcern for the people that, worked for the organization, and for the people that were going to be remaining in the organization. And so, maybe I'm rambling, but yes, the answer to your question is, I don't know how you do the job without a deep concern for people. And that certainly, for me, comes from a deep spiritual place more than my natural tendencies, which are much more selfish.
When you're CEO of a larger company, or even a smaller company, there's a chance that there's all kinds of diversity and spirituality in the workplace. Can you talk about, how you have seen that work out well, and maybe if you have seen it not work out well for some reason?
Yeah. So, certainly, most organizations of any size, you're going to have a diverse workforce, especially if you're diverse geographically across the world. You're going to, look very different than if you have everybody, from a particular region of the country, where there may be more homogeneity in the spirituality views. But I think that, the fundamental question is, does your business culture respect people? And if it does, then that will support a wide range of spirituality, as well as other values and views, and even the lack of spirituality in people. All of that will be supported and worked. If you don't have a deep respect for people, and that everyone's just as important, we just have different jobs to do in the organization, then you're going to have a challenge. And, we see that at the country level as well. if you can't listen to other people's views, if other people's views upset you so much that you just can't be in the same room with them, you can't tolerate them, that is going to be a challenge in any organization.
So your connection between business and spirituality comes down to the fundamentals of you do business through people, and so you want to come from a place of love and a place of kindness, really, and a place of what's best for them, because that helps them and it helps you and it helps the company. I suspect that depending on the CEO's personality, that there might be some gray area as far as boundaries in some instances about, wanting to help somebody, wanting to forgive him, but the performance is not there, and that might be something that each individual has to kind of navigate on their own. But maybe you can speak to your experience with that.
Yeah, certainly when you're in a business and you hire people for a job, that is a transaction, just like we talked about before. The company's given a certain set of certain amount of money to a person to perform a set of tasks, and both think they're getting the good end of the deal. I think the $100,000 I'm paying the employee is going to come back to me as $120,000 or $150,000 or $200,000. Otherwise, I would not hire that person. And the person thinks that, their labor, it's very fair for them to exchange their labor for that $100,000. If that person, returns $20,000 to the business, obviously it's no longer a fair transaction, right? Now, obviously there's some subjective judgment in these things. In most cases, it's not as easy as putting together a spreadsheet and saying, oh, I pay this person $100,000. They only deliver $20,000 of value to the business. But ultimately, it's a judgment call that the management is making around that simple equation. Are they providing the value to the business? And people want in their jobs to be successful. They want to win. Nobody enjoys being in a job where they're not being successful, where they're not achieving things. And so often it is even in the best interests of people, if they're only providing $20,000 of value, to find another job. Now, most of us are not willing to do that. That's a hard thing. And so, a lot of times the company does have to make that decision for the employee. But it is not from a place of not caring about the employee, because long-term, that's not a sustainable transaction. If I'm paying you $100,000, you're providing $20,000 of value, that's not a long-term sustainable. And eventually that could impact my ability to pay everybody else in the organization as well. And so, that's the way I think of it. You never want to have to, you want to make no hiring mistakes. I would love for every employee I hire to be, a superstar and provide tremendous value and let me continue to raise their salary because they're providing so much value. But obviously that doesn't happen. But again, I think if you think of it in the right perspective, you understand that it is a caring way, and how you handle it obviously is probably just as important. I think the CEO who fired the 900 people on Zoom, I think the real problem was not that he fired 900 people. He may have needed to fire 900 people. I don't know anything about his business, but that may have been the right answer. But how he did it, what I call the concept of process fairness, is where you really get in trouble most of the time. It's not the actual decision you make, it's how you handle and communicate that decision is where people really have a problem with leadership.
You seem to have a very clear, discerning way of looking at this. And I know from my personal experience with you and meeting a lot of the people around you last week that you walk your talk. You surround yourself with people, you let them go, you treat them well. Do you think it's more common for CEOs to know that they need to treat people well in order to be successful? Or is this something that, just like a young man or a young woman doesn't really know much about relationship until there's a bunch of experience,
Right.
Just from your perspective, do you think that it's common for CEOs to know these things, or it's uncommon?
Well, I think, first of all, there's a difference between knowing and being able to act. I've been playing competitive tennis for 50 years. I know a lot about tennis, but there are 15, 16-year-olds that know nothing about tennis, but can beat me because they're 15 or 16-year-old and their body does things that my 56-year-old body doesn't do. And so people often think knowing is equal to doing, and they're not. Knowing is a necessary, kind of starting point a little bit. It's helpful to know, but numerous people have done many things without understanding the underlying theory. There are great musicians, for existence, that couldn't read music, and so knowing is certainly helpful, but it is not what you need to perform any task. So knowing that people are important is one thing, but having built up the personal habits in leadership to recognize that, reward that, value that, create organizations that understand that, that's the challenge. That's the hard part. I think most CEOs, yes, if you ask them, oh yeah, people are our most important asset. And, I was in a conversation with a group that will go nameless, where we were having this kind of very conversation that, they were saying in case that customers were the important thing. And then later we're talking and they had developed a bonus program built around EBITDA. And I was just like, well, if customers are the most important thing, then why isn't the bonus program built around net promoter score for the customer? That would be consistent, but you're kind of confusing me when you tell me customers are the most important, but your performance incentives are built around EBITDA. And so I think same thing with, employees. I think if you ask CEOs, yeah, they'd say, oh yeah, our employees are so important. They're the most important thing. And then you just watch their behavior and that would not be consistent. And that's where they get into trouble.
You prefaced this entire segment by saying that creating personal habits of leadership is what is necessary to do what you know, as opposed to knowing what you do.
Yeah.
How did you develop your personal habits of leadership? Because habits are not easy to form or to break.
That is correct. And, that's one of the, kind of the lucks of my career has been that I, started my first business over 30 years ago. And so I've had a lot of practice. I've had a lot of chances to do things wrong and learn from those things. I think also I've been observant of others, and certainly I have tried to read and ascertain best practices and put those in place. But it does take time and effort, and that's a challenge in the CEO role for a lot of people, is they don't get a lot of practice in the role, and they get put into the role with very little training, often with a limited time scale, 2 or 3 years to kind of deliver performance, or the board's going to get impatient and move on. And then if you've been fired as CEO, well, then no one's going to hire you to be CEO again often. And so that's the challenge, is a lot of people don't get a chance to practice these skills and develop these skills. And it's really hard to learn on the job.
I think on that note, since you brought it about training, and that's what American SEO is about, I think this is a good place to stop. I enjoyed this conversation. I don't know about you, Joel, but and I look forward to continuing the conversations next year. So thank you so much for your time. And
good to be with you.
Happy holidays to you.
Same to you.
Okay. All right, buddy. So you have a call now at 9:30, right?
Yep.
So I'll see you in about half an hour with.
How was that?
I thought it was awesome. It didn't seem like you had to struggle with any answers about anything, and it's all related to how you treat people, which is what a lot of spirituality and a lot of business is about, which I did not know that this is the way the conversation was going to go. So
good.
How do you feel about it?
It was fine. I mean, it's hard. I mean,
yeah,
especially since I was making stuff up, it was hard for me to listen and decide whether it was any good at the same time, but I mean, I've thought, obviously I've thought about all these issues before. How spirituality, I mean, and I'm in some groups where we talk about some of this. But yeah, I've never presented it formally. And so I don't have it structured.
I don't think you make stuff up as you go, Joel. I think you just let it come out.
Fair enough.
I have a friend who used to say, what happened? He was talking about people, but he says, what happens when you squeeze an orange? Well, you get orange juice. No, when you squeeze an orange, whatever is inside of it comes out. And so the same thing with people, right? When you squeeze somebody, you put them in travel situation or difficult situations, sometimes that's when you see their true nature, if they're good or whatever. And so you don't make stuff up. It's all in there. You just let it come out.
Fair enough. Okay.
All right.
We'll talk at top of the hour.
Okay. Bye.